right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the pilot episode of the Roma Forum podcast. My name's Anthony, and I'm joined today by Luca and Christian. We wanted to start off by thanking you for joining us today. This is something new. None of us have done anything like this before, and I think that that's a good way to introduce a very important reality. What we want Roma Forum to be. First and foremost, I'm going to share this, and then I'll turn it over to Luca and Christian. But I'm not Fabrizio Romano. I'm not Gianluca Di Marzio. I'm not here to pretend like I know secret information that you guys don't know. I'm a fan, just like all of you, and we're here to develop and put out fan-driven content. That's really what's important to us.
Yeah, I think that's totally accurate. I mean, I don't know shit about, I don't have any sort of internal communications with anyone regarding transfers or anything like that. I just merely, every match day, I come in and I sit down in front of my TV and I scream at the TV. I jump and yell, and I'm a fan. And that's what we're here to do. Just kind of give that type of, well, I would say joy, but sometimes it's not joyous. Just kind of let that bleed off to all of y'all who might or might not be listening to this.
Yeah, exactly. Like, just, it's good to have a couple different perspectives and different opinions, especially on a team that we all commonly support. So, just to give our insight and opinions on, what the current team and form is like, throughout the rest of the community, the Roma community, there's probably other questions that we answer that other people have never spoken up and stated before that we may answer on this podcast or throughout our discussions in future conversations and debates, if you will. But yeah, that's what we're here to do.
Right. Yeah. I think it's really important emphasizing that different perspective sort of thing. Again, we're not professionals, but also we're all very different. We met on Twitter in a Twitter group chat that
true.
made its way. Yeah.
Very true.
Shrunk down to about 5 of us and then moved over into WhatsApp. And it's been about 3 or 4 years now. And it took about 3 or 4 years for the podcast plans to make it out of the group chat, but we're finally here. I don't know. It's been a while, guys.
Yeah,
just see where it goes.
It's pretty hilarious. I was just talking about this with a couple of my other buddies, and they're like, "How long have you been in contact with these dudes for?" And I couldn't remember, so I went back to the Twitter chat, and it's still there, or one of them's still there, and it's like you said, it's been like 3 or 4 years that we've been not only talking about Roma, but about each other's lives, and
yeah, exactly.
I mean, we're from totally different parts of the country and countries, which is kind of cool.
Maybe we got a resident Canadian here. So, what do we want to get out of this? Nothing other than sharing the passion that we have for this sport, but most of all for this team. In a little bit, we'll talk about briefly the national team call-ups as they relate to Roma, but this is about Roma. This isn't an environment where we plan to spend much time talking about other teams. We're sort of avoiding bias against Roma by, introducing an environment that is exclusively for Roma and Romanisti. In particular, those who speak English, English is our first language. So giving that space, that social space to English-speaking Roma fans is really important to us. After this weekend, there was a pretty, a positive result, 1-0. It could have been easily 4 or maybe even 5-0. But, looking ahead, we started this project towards the end of the season. And what we're hoping to do now, at least with this pilot podcast, is to figure out where our footing is. I don't know. How do you guys feel about the last stretch of the season? Finishing up. We have a Lecce next week, so maybe if we want to talk about that.
Yeah, I also think it's worth noting that the day we're recording this podcast is Wednesday, March 19th. So depending on when listeners are tuning into this right now, we just kind of came out of the weekend with that match against Cagliari at home. Like Anthony said, came off a 1-0 win. So we're in pretty good form. But to answer your question, Anthony, basically this last stretch of games is definitely going to be a tough stretch. But look at the form that we're in right now. And again, I'm not going to say that the last few games weren't the smaller side teams, but then again, in Serie A, there's no game, at least in my opinion, is a simple game. Especially Roma, they seem to
Yeah.
make every match Roma plays, whether it's Empoli or AC Milan, it's an uphill battle from first minute to the 95th minute or whatever that is. But I don't know. My opinion, the last stretch of games is like I was mentioning before we were talking, guys. I personally get more nervous of the games against the smaller clubs like Empoli, Venezia, you name it, rather than against teams like Napoli and Juve because like in all sports, you play down to your opponent, and I think Rome is the perfect example of that. So yeah, I mean, we got Lecce next week. We're away though, so I'm not going to say it's an easy game, but I think we can do it given the form that we've been in. I think Claudio Ranieri's been doing a great job with what he's got at his disposal, at least thus far. But after Lecce, I'm looking at it now. We got Juve at home, Lazio, and then Hellas Verona, Inter in Fiorentina. So definitely a last. There's a big push there. And who would have thought? I mean, we'll get into this more, but who would have thought we would be where we are now compared to where we were at just about a couple months ago, late November, with Ivan Juric and whatnot. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 9 matches left, and as it's said, as it's been said a number of times, it's 9 finals. I mean,
yeah, Milos said 9 finals. Yeah,
and for sure, I thought that we were destined to either tie or lose the first final last week, but pulled out a solid 3 points there, and that's all that matters. And I think it just kind of. We were sort of talking that, this match could either be a blowout, 4-1, 4-0, or it could be a 1-0 match, butthole clenched the whole entire match. It just depends on, which way Roma shows up. And Lecce is no walk in the park. I think we've said that, I think Anthony and I were discussing a little bit before. It wasn't really until December that we ever got decent results against Lecce or in the recent history. I mean, Anthony, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but
we had a couple of close, 1-goal wins. December was a blowout, but we drew them twice, I think, since 2022, and one important point I think I wanted to make that relates to something both of you said, Luca, like when you said last week could have ended in a draw, and Christian, when you said, we always play down, and that's particularly true with Roma. And the point I like to make is that you guys are both like dead on, in another year, last Sunday ends in a draw. It's sort of the norm, or this like really almost perverted anticipation of a loss or a draw against a small team. But I think that's really been resolved by Ranieri's ability to instill an identity in this team, an identity that was wounded by the fact that Daniele De Rossi was sacked so quickly into the season and essentially mutilated by Juric's tenure on the bench for us.
What is he, the worst coach in, well, not that it matters to Roma, but the worst coach in Premier League history?
Yeah, I mean, this guy,
Roma, Jesus,
it's not his year at all. He got okay results with Torino, but there's no pressure there. It's basically don't get relegated. And as long as you do that and you're a yes man for Cairo, he was doing fine. But in a place like Roma, totally just a symptom of ownership not really understanding the gravity of what they've gotten themselves into and the product maybe that they're dealing with. That aside, I know we wanted to mention briefly the national team.
I want to touch on Lecce really quick.
Oh, sure.
I think it also is a perfect opportunity for the team to find some sort of cohesiveness without Dybala being in. I mean, we have no idea how long he's going to be out. They said at
That's
least a
true.
month.
Yeah.
So it's a chance for the squad to really, show, yeah, we can play without our star player. And I think it also depends on, do we start with Eldor or do we start with Artem Dovbik? Because as you mentioned it, and you can expound on this of how you view how we play with Dovbik and how we play with Eldor. Anthony, you were saying that basically you can say it better than I can.
Yeah. So the point I made was just sort of, again, I'm not a manager, I'm not a journalist, but as someone, an ordinary person who just watches these games, it seems like, and again, qualifying it with, I know Ranieri knows what he's doing, totally not questioning him at all. However, it does seem a little bit like the way we play when Dovbik is on the field is the way that we should play when Eldor is on the field, and then vice versa. When Eldor is on the field, I feel like how we play with him, it should be how we play with Dovbik, and we gotta be honest, guys. I mean, he's been getting a lot of slack. I know, Luca, you referred to him as the Ukrainian pylon quite a few times. There have been some comparisons to Dzeko and Dzeko's first season.
He's got double-digit goals. I'll give him that.
Right, but
again, he's come from a completely different league too,
Yeah,
though, right? And as we all know, City is by far the hardest league to succeed as a striker in, as it's a very defensive league, as we know that. But yeah.
And I mean, it might be a little bit of a hot take, but I might even argue that Dzeko, his goal scoring ability and his abilities off the ball, or in build-up, he might be the best striker Roma's ever had. So can Artem live up to that? I don't know.
It's still early. It's his first season. Like I said, he's coming from a completely different league. What's more fascinating to me, at least, is who would have thought that in 2025 we'd be talking about Eldor Shomorodov starting as a striker for Roma.
I mean, the guy is similar to Belotti in that he's a workhorse, man. He really, really cares. He really, really tries.
He found a new footing for sure under these managerial spells, and Ranieri sees something in him in training, and he's proven that on the pitch every time he's been on the field. And for me, at least, what's important as a striker, even if you don't score every game, just like having that drive and showing for the ball, getting into position, being able to play with your back towards the goal and be an option for your attacking midfielders. I feel, this is my opinion, I feel like Shomorodov does a much better job at that over Dovbik. But again, pros and cons, right? Dovbik has other qualities over Eldor Shomorodov and vice versa, but it's a toss-up.
And Eldor's been in the league a few years, right?
Exactly.
Not just with Roma. He played with other teams. I think he was in Genoa. It's different environments. You never know. I mean,
I'm not ready to castrate, though. Not there. I'll give him one season, but
well, speaking of castrating, it seems like Roma's connection to the national team has been completely severed this year, at least for Nations League. At the end of the day, what does it mean for Roma? Nothing. It means that Spalletti right now does not consider any of our players, our Italian players, good enough for the national team for this competition, and that's okay.
If I could chime in there on that, like I was saying before, I feel like every time, especially a player like Lorenzo Pellegrini, gets called up to the national team, he gets hurt in training or something, and then it just sets us back. So a tournament like the Nations League, which I'll be honest, to be quite frank, I don't give two shits about. It's probably a blessing in disguise that none of our players are called up, which is taking out the risk of anyone getting injured while they're at Coverciano training with the rest of the national team. They could just solely focus on training with the team at Trigoria and not having that extra pressure on them with that regard. Again, if it was the Euro Cup or World Cup, I would have a totally different opinion on that. But again, this is something where Spalletti is mostly just experimenting on players who are in form right now. A player like Moise Kean, who's been pretty on fire this season. But then again, like we said, we're recording this on March 19th, and news just broke out today, or was it yesterday, that Matteo Retegui, he got injured, so he's out now. So Italy hasn't even played their first game against Germany yet, and this guy's already injured. So Atalanta fans must be pretty upset about that. And just going back to my point where it's like, we don't have to have that stress for once for an international break with one of our star players getting out injured.
Yeah.
And I mean, with the 9 finals, it gives our players an extra 2 weeks rest or week rest, or however, this international break is a rest break, hopefully, for at least for the Italian players on the squad.
It's called up for France.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. So here's, hot take. Maybe Spalletti is kind of wanting Roma to make a push at the Scudetto. So he's like, you know what? We're gonna not call any Roma players up.
Yeah.
Glass half full outlook here, huh?
I never even thought about that, Luca. That's actually hilarious. And you know what? If that is the case,
I mean, I think it's true that when he left Trigoria after his last stint at manager, he left with a bullhorn and he shouted Forza Roma into it as he left Trigoria. So, hey,
I wouldn't
we'll
doubt
take it. If he's got a soft spot for us still, which I think he does, I really do think he cares about Roma as an organization, as a team. I'll take it. Listen, keep us away from the Nations League curse.
Yeah,
any coach that comes.
Go for it.
No, I was just going to say, any coach that returns to a club more than once, a.k.a. Spalletti or Ranieri, clearly has a soft spot for the club that goes beyond most other coaches would have. So there's no doubt in my mind that Spalletti doesn't have respect for Roma. I mean, he spent a lot of his career there. It's just unfortunate that he couldn't get anything major with us, at least, like he did in his season over there at Napoli. But again, he's had different players to work with. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I think we all made some pretty respectable points today. I don't think we should go too long, and I really enjoyed this. I think this is great.
Yeah, just a pilot, right?
Yeah, I appreciate everyone who's listened. We're learning. Again, not professionals. We're trying to figure out what works best for us. I would invite, we're normal people. So if you have any questions, we have a website, romaforum.com. You can submit questions on there for us to answer. Or
even send us a DM on Instagram.
Yeah, DM us
everywhere.
On Instagram. Instagram's Roma Forum. You can find us on X at Roma Forum 1927. And if you enjoyed this, please share. Give us a follow on one of our socials. And we look forward to talking for you guys again.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth mentioning that this is something where we're very open to having guests occasionally on the podcast and, joining our discussions, depending on what's going on throughout the season and what time it is that we're talking. Yeah, I mean, just more of an introductory, but this is what we're doing and this is the vision.
Yeah. No. Thanks again for listening. Do you have anything you want to close out with, Luca?
No, I think it's just we're normal fans from different, I would say, from different parts of the country, like I said before, but also
I'll say it. I'm the Canadian. I'm from Canada.
Yeah, and so and I think I think that should kind of be evident in this podcast, and nothing too serious. We're just having a conversation, giving our thoughts of what of a team that we so dearly care about. Some weeks we love them more than others, but
yeah, send in feel free to send in any questions or topics that you want us to bring up and discuss. We're more than happy to do so. Again, just
aside from transfers.
Yeah, we'll save that for the summer mercato, but yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Ciao.
Thanks.
Ciao.